is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. Hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Triet Nguyen, a principal at Rende Capital, an early-stage venture fund based in Louisville, Kentucky, investing across the South and Midwest. Triet focuses on backing high-agency founders who are building real infrastructure and essential technology in markets that most big coastal funds still treat as flyover. At Rende, he not only leads investment analysis and deal selection, but also helps design programs and platforms that bring the fund closer to founders long before a traditional VC round. From startup competitions and equity crowdfunding matching programs to incentives and initiatives specifically aimed at supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs. Triet, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So where are you calling from today?
So I'm calling out of Dallas. I recently moved down to Dallas, and now we have two HQs, one in Louisville, Kentucky, and then one down here in Dallas.
That's great. So let's talk about Rende Capital's thesis. How would you phrase it in one sentence, and why did you choose that one?
Yeah, I think you captured it pretty well, but how I typically explain it to a lot of folks is I like to back high agency founders building weird infrastructure for overlooked markets, typically relating to certain legacy or archaic industries.
And so why the South and Midwest? Do you consider those to be mispriced markets by the coast, or why that?
Part of it is, that's the promise that we made to our LPs, right, to invest outside of the coast. I think the other reasons that we really like it is that we're more competitive when we invest in Middle of America and avoiding the coast, ranging from our ability to help founders post-investment with customer intros, investors for their next round, and a lot of corporates we know more of in Middle America. So yeah.
Great. Well, you source deals regionally in the South and Midwest, but how do you stay competitive nationally with that program? On the West Coast, East Coast, they're raising hundreds of millions of dollars for seed companies now for AI, but how do you compete with that?
Yeah, I think for me, particularly whenever I come to a situation like we're talking about right now, I like to think about, okay, what's the inverse of it? It's like we're trying to compete with it. What does it look like if we try to not compete with it? And where would we be best not competing? And then from there, we kind of go down those rabbit holes, right? I think for us, we are a lot more relationship focused just because there's a lot of less investors in Middle America. So I do try to do, whenever we do travel, we host VC dinners and we'll cap that to 5 to 10 folks. And that's where we essentially pitch certain thesis that we've researched or wrote papers about that we don't really publicly announce to a lot of folks. But then in those conversations, we stay top of mind for a lot of folks. Our last deal of 2025, that was how it came to. I was in Arkansas grabbing lunch with a VC from Arkansas and, told her my thesis on how AI is affecting certain auto repair shops. 4 months went by, nothing. And then she hit me out of nowhere. It's like, hey, came across this company in North Dakota. Thought it was a fit for what you guys are doing. And it was great. It was a fit, and we ended up investing.
That's great. So you invest in high agency founders that, what do they look like in practice? For example, when you're talking to them in the first meeting, what jumps out at you that says, I may be talking to one of these guys?
Yeah, I think it's in their mannerism and words that they choose, right? One of my favorite questions to ask is, what is your biggest obstacle right now? A lot of times founders will say capital, and how they lean into that fundraising process, right? Some, you can automatically tell that they blame a lot of folks. They start complaining about the comparison of I just don't know why this company in California is getting more traction in fundraising than I do. It's just so confusing when we have better judges. A lot of that, that's kind of saying okay, you're quick to point fingers out and you're a little bit quick to complain when this is an investor call when you're supposed to be presenting, showing like, hey, I'm the visionary, I can do it, and the team that I put around me can do it. And I think when certain founders will phrase that, like, obviously capital, but they'll say like, but obviously we're having this conversation, doing this stuff. I think more importantly, and then they'll move on and they start talking about the vision obstacle and next obstacle and how they tie that into how do you build this certain the current cap table and where they see we are a value add for certain areas and not. So I think that those are little key things that point out. It's like this is high agency founders. They will do it with or without us.
So you talked about the strange but essential infrastructure angle that you look for. What are some examples of categories you like and why they win? How do you choose these deals from that point of view?
Yeah, I think depending on different industry, it looks differently. I'll give you an example. So we backed a company called Shopee, and what they built is a infrastructure for cross-border commerce from US to Latam, right? Before them is a very chaotic process where if you're in Brazil or really anywhere in Latam and you want certain products like a Mac or certain stuff on Amazon, a lot of them don't ship down to Latam. So it's extremely chaotic. You find a random person that you send it to you, and then that person will put in their luggage, they'll fly it to you, and you pray that it shows up at your door. Usually it's go family, friends. Sometimes like people make businesses of like, oh, this guy travels. Let me refer you. But what they built was they just built the digital infrastructure similar to how you think of like Uber, right? Like taxis always been around, but there was no digital infrastructure for share ride. So that's essentially how we view things, and those are the stuff that we love. It's all kind of tied to whenever we're looking at or when we're listening to pitches, we're trying to find that what insights does this company or this founder has, and how are they leveraging certain tech or sometimes political inflection points that help them build certain infrastructure for a very niche industry.
Cool. And so, what are the deal killers that take them out of running for you? What do you see out there that says, well, this isn't for us?
I think for me particularly, it's the first sense that founders are trying to play that FOMO game. They say like, oh, they start name dropping certain funds and where their traction with it and the conversation. And it's like, hey, you need to make a decision in like 2 weeks. And sometimes deals do get hot, and we do need to get the team together and move fast on a lot of stuff. But obviously, before taxing the team, and because VC is such a small ecosystem, it's usually just one or two connections away from just like, hey, I heard that I talked to this company. They mentioned you guys are leading this round and like these allocations, stuff like that. It usually takes me less than like 5, 6 hours to get that information. And when that kind of comes back, it's like, yeah, we exchanged 2 emails and we kind of told them that we'll get back to them. That's when it's like, hey, it sounds like the round's getting really hot. Congratulations, it's gonna be a pass for us. We won't be able to move as fast, and you'd be very surprised. 99% of the companies will come back like, oh well, we're actually extending it a month, 2 months. So I think that's the biggest deal killer for me.
Hmm. That makes sense. So, how do you help founders after the investment? What skills or resources you bring to bear to help the founders, and where's your sweet spot?
Yeah, so we're generalists. I'm very transparent with founders that we have range, but not depth. So me particularly, I'm a lot better for connecting founders with other investors. We have a deal flow newsletter that last year we made over 100 intros for companies to investors, and I'm better at fundraising strategies. Now my GP, he's a little bit more experienced, so he's been around the block working at corporations, his own startups that he exited, and fund of funds. So when it comes to customer intros, like if a company really say, hey, we don't need investor help, we just need customers, that's usually when it's like, okay, Patrick's going to be the point of contact and he's going to be the one that's working with you guys the closest. So we try to offset each other. And then we have a bunch of vendors where I don't think we're great at hiring. So we actually just went out and just partnered with a bunch of recruiters to get, a pretty big discount for our companies if they ended up using them.
Well, one of my favorite topics is how do you foster a regional startup ecosystem? So when you're working, in the South and Mid East, it's not the West Coast, East Coast. It can be quite different there. So what do you find actually creates a thriving ecosystem for the startups in the areas that you're in?
I won't speak to the overarching all regional ecosystem that, is on the coast where I've had experience and I've got a chance to work firsthand is obviously in Kentucky and you'll hear a little bit in Dallas. I think the first thing is that I think a lot of people get it wrong is they try to do impact and that's the primary driver, right? And we do see it dying. My belief is that impact without returns is just charity, and no one's in the business of venture capital to do charity. So you have to create impact by generating returns. And usually that means you have to be a lot more dynamic with funding vehicles, right? I think a lot of times, especially when I was in Kentucky, there were a lot of times where companies they had a great product. It was entrepreneur, great product. We could sense that they were missing a little bit of that velocity in growth just from the mindset, right? I will give credit to SF in New York and the coast where, from a general speaking point, most of those founders are 24/7. You move to middle America for a slower pace of life, and that's fine. But there's certain discounted premiums that play into that. So then it's like, hey, you built a great company and there's certainly traction here. It might not be venture backable. So instead of doing your typical price round, safe or convertible notes, hey, we should do a rev share. You have that, like, this is something that's great for a rev share. This is something that let's be creative and structure how we can get returns so that way we can continue to feed the next generation of opportunities and founders. And again, without those returns, you're essentially just doing charity work and it quickly dies.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it teaches entrepreneurs the, hey, this is what it means when you take outside capital.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. I mean, Brad Feld once said that to create a startup ecosystem, you need lots of interactions. So you need a certain amount of density between the founders, investors, and customers. And you're in Dallas there, where when I left it, 30 years ago, it was 2 million people. Now it's almost 8. It's 120 miles wide. It's 150 miles north and south. It's almost, encroaching into Oklahoma. And so how do you build that density when, the geography spreads it out so much like that?
Yeah, I wish I had an answer for you. If I did, I might be coming from here here in Dallas. Because yeah, we've done events where I brought a couple of VCs together and it was like, hey, come pitch. We will give you feedback on how to pitch better and stuff like that. 35 people signed up. We had like 4 people show up. And there's like, I looked at some of the other investors like, I'm so sorry. There's 3, 4 of you guys here, and there's only 4 founders. It's like, well, that lets me have to dive deep with every company. So I think when it comes to density, I think outside of just the physical itself, the lack of investors also doesn't help, right? Or the right investor profile. Tons of family offices here, a lot of money here, but obviously that flows into oil, gas, real estate, private equity, but there's not early stage capital in venture. And I think that's where it makes it even harder for founders. Like, well, if I go to this, I don't know there's going to be there, but then there's not a lot of digital density at the same time.
Right. Well, I used to work in Europe, and I was interested. I found it interesting that almost every city tried to have a core competency. We're going to do this very, very specific thing very well and not try to be everything. And I always wondered if that would translate to a place like Dallas, where you have communities in, you got Plano, you got Louisville, you got a number of different areas there that have strong groups of founders that are working. And they seem to be a mixture in everywhere. There's no striving after core competency where it may be mobile apps or maybe fintech or maybe AI. But there were quite a few pockets of interest around the city itself. And we was trying to do something with life science, but found that, many of the investors I wanted to come to my event in Richardson, they weren't going to drive an hour and a half through traffic to get there. It was just too far. And so felt like, well, if I want to do something with life science, I need to be on the other side of town because that seemed to be more the center of gravity for it. What do you see there in Dallas?
Yeah, I'm surprised that Dallas isn't more, or I guess better known for mobility, to your point, it being so spread out. And it'd be great for a lot of like mobility companies, because if you want to test your vehicle, I know you can get the permits for it, 75, 635, that's going to definitely test how good your autonomous car is. But to train it to get to that point, it's 45 minutes to the suburbs, right? Like I was taught to learn how to drive as a teenager in the suburbs because you might see one car moving if you get far out.
Wow. Yeah. So it is a challenge from that point of view, and we'll see where it goes there. But let's talk about portfolio construction in these emerging ecosystems where there are good companies, but there's probably not a deep, rich pool of them in one sector or whatever else. So how do you right size your check for that, do follow on investing and set up reserves? What's your strategy there?
I wish I could like share my screen, because we essentially build out like a spreadsheet model, and it essentially breaks down to, okay, if this is our fund, take this away for fees, and we set this aside for reserves. Where do we want to invest between pre-seed and seed? Of that, how many companies per stage? What is that check size needs to be? And then from there, how do we model in that dilution if we do want to follow on and keep our positioning? And then it also has like a time pacing model out as well. So all that's to say, it's just one of those things that you just got to sit down, get really bored, and just force yourself to think it through. And it's not going to be fun, because when you think about it, it's like, oh, I have this much capital, I want to deploy this much. There's this. You can't go to LPs and pitch that, because the really institutional ones are like, okay, well, how do you protect dilution? How do you know? Like, they'll grill you, and it's just so much easier to have that spreadsheet. And that's been extremely nice for us, because once we see the numbers and once we see the math, we're like, wow, we can only really follow on 10% of pre-seed investments to seed, and then 10% of seed to Series A. But we'll never do pre-seed, seed, and Series A, just because the model doesn't really work out and the math doesn't work out for a fund our size to invest in 3 rounds. And I think that's why you see some of the mega funds, though, do it. They have that math works out for them. So yeah.
Okay. Well, so what's your advice to founders who are raising in these, areas around the country, like the South and the Midwest? How do they position themselves? How do they tell the story, and what raises that check from your group?
Yeah. I would first recommend they read the book Pattern Breakers. Love that book. I think it's amazing for founders to read it, understand a better answer to the why now, and especially why here, as a way to gather a lot of their insights and inflection for that narrative. Because I think that's a lot of things that they'll miss when you talk to founders. And the other aspect of it is a grind. And as much as you're not gonna like it and hate it, that's part of the job that you signed up for. So love it, get used to it. And again, it kind of goes back to that we talked about, right? It's the little cues in your mannerism, your verbiage, that will indicate to us how do you view tackling really hard things when things aren't going very well? And that's, if you do those two things, you'll be able to show grit, show that you're a leader as far as how you carry yourself and how you tackle obstacles and when things get really hard. And if you read the book, they do an amazing job of explaining how to, talk about why here, why now, why me. And they use amazing historical use cases like Lyft, Twitch, YouTube, Uber.
So traction is a key word there. Every investor's looking for it, but and I find that most are looking at it in the form of revenue. And my question is what non-revenue forms of traction do you get excited about?
I think in the form of non-revenue, there's like that metadata of revenue, which we like to call velocity. So if it took you 3 years to get $3 million, probably not going to cut it. Now, if it took you a year to get to $3 million, that metadata, like the velocity itself, that's a huge signal, right? The other side of that, where I love to grill founders on is, there's like, hey, we're pre-revenue, we're early revenue. Cool. Revenue is really just a lagging indicator anyways. So I would ask them, like, okay, tell me about what do you think your leading indicators are that you found a product market fit or at least a solution problem fit. And a lot of times it is retention. My favorite is the double CAC. How long does it take someone to pay 2x back of what it took you to acquire them in the first place? And then just trying to ask founders, like, what is your North Star metric, right? Is it credibility? A lot of the times it is going to be a intangible trait. It's, hey, credibility, trusting with customers, and that comes in the form of, we've noticed that the majority of our customer comes from referred. So that's the only metric that we care about, is how can we get new customers to do more referred. Revenue, everything else, secondary metric. I was like, okay, that's amazing. That. You know where your company needs to go and the true metric that will guide you there. And then the revenue is going to be a lag indicator, right?
That's good. Great answer. Scott Adams once said that losers have goals, winners have systems. What do you think about looking at systems that people are building and making an estimation on that? What experience do you have there?
When we talk about systems, are you talking about, I guess, what kind of systems? Like,
System to generate leads, a system to fulfill the service, a system to recruit new customers, a system to support, things in place that, especially around generating customers, it's not just, selling it to your five friends and saying, hey, I have a great business. You actually have a lead generation system that you have conversion rates and you have processes to carry, something through to a successful sale, and there's some scalability around that system as well.
yeah, I'm actually going to steal this answer from an investor you actually might know, Gordon, Capital Factory.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things he taught me whenever I was there, he used to put founders through the so what game. And I think now, as we're talking about systems, a lot of founders will pitch like, hey, this is our go-to-market strategy. We're going to spend X% of this raise on marketing, sales, etc. I'll, I'll see that. And it's like, what I tell our founders is like, as investors, we don't really care what you spend the money on. We care what it generates in return. So knowing that, I want to understand your how. So I was like, so what if you did this as your go-to-market strategy, working with, retailers or channel partners? They'll give an answer. It's like, so what? And then usually about 2, 3 times, like, okay, so how are you piecing all that together to make sure that this is actually a valid system to get you the results you want? And you'd be surprised, a lot of founders break down midway through that conversation just because I don't think they've fully thought it through. Sometimes they don't need to, right? Sometimes they're like, hey, I'm terrible at sales. I need to bring on a person that does SDR. Okay, but how are you going to enable that person to sell your product? They don't know you. And it's fine if that's a system that they want to use. But like I mentioned, how they explain to me how they're going to train that SDR person to properly pitch their product to their ICP, that's probably going to be the most important part.
Mhm. Well, great. So in the last minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I think we kind of covered a lot of it. I'm kind of happy that you didn't ask me for my 2026 prediction AI market.
No, that's okay. Happy to have it, but there's just a lot of them out there right now, and I just finished reading the 2025 success rates, and they're usually not very good. So I stopped reading them after a while because it's interesting, but it's just hard to build something around that because things are going to change as we go forward, especially in today's world. Very, very chaotic. Lots of curveballs coming at you, but that makes life interesting, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, happy to quickly dive down that. I think my perspective, I think a lot of investors and even founders sometimes they'll make certain predictions and they'll use that as a somewhat guiding principle to the milestones that they want to accomplish in the coming year. And I've seen it happen quite often more than not, unless you're like Mark Andreessen and you have like an incredible mental palace to like go through that system of thought, most of the time it's gonna trick you to creating biases or biases to make sure that your prediction come true. And that's usually when they don't come true and you're a little bit stuck in your way and you're not being able to quickly adapt. So yeah.
Sounds great. Well, so how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty open on all social. I think LinkedIn is the easiest way. If you're reaching out, please put some sort of note, obviously saying that you heard about me here would be great. And then just a quick one line of like why you want to connect. I don't need like an entire pitch because we're never going to invest via LinkedIn DM. Like save it for the call. Just give me a quick, what is it? Where'd you hear me from? What do you want? And I'm happy to do that. And then my email is tret@render.capital. Answer all the emails I get unless it goes to spam, which at that point I'm sorry. But yeah,
Great. Well, we'll include your contact details in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today, and we hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
thanks. Thanks for having me. See you.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.